Dear church, let's have a conversation with Travis Bookout. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. I'm excited to have my friend Travis Bookout on the show today. Travis, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely, me too. Hey, before we jump into our topic, I want you to bring us up to date. You've had some family changes, some life changes. You've moved to a different work. Tell us all about it.
Okay, yeah. So in January this year, we moved from Monroe, Louisiana to Maryville, Tennessee to work with the
Wow.
Maryville Christ. We were in Louisiana for about 8.5 years, and with the Jackson Street Church of Christ, and that's a church that we loved our time there. We love so many of the relationships and the friends that we made there. It was a very difficult place to leave. When we got the opportunity for Maryville, it took a lot of thought, a lot of prayer. One thing that we kind of considered was Lauren's parents live in Sevierville, which is pretty close to here.
Sure.
And her sisters live right in the area. And my brother just moved up to Tennessee last year. And so we didn't really have any family near us in Monroe, but we had some here.
Right.
Also, we love the mountains, and we're right by the mountains, and it's a wonderful city. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll look into it and see if the church is, a congregation we want to work with.
Yeah.
We knew a little bit about the church already because Lauren's family was in the area. We helped her little sister find a church one time, and I was doing some research, and I told her, if I lived where you live, I'd go to church at the Maryville Church of Christ after looking at things online. And that was years ago. And so she loved her time here at Maryville. She had great things to say about it. So we looked into it, and once we met the elders and started getting to know the people here, it just seemed like a door was opening for us, and so we went through it.
Absolutely. You've had enough time to be there now and to know whether you made a good move or not, and I assume you made a great move.
We've been very happy with it so far. It's been wonderfully.
And tell us about your family. You got the two little boys that I know that you're loving, being in the mountains and going hiking and all that. How's that going?
Oh, it's great. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, Oliver and Levi. And their favorite thing in the world is to be outdoors, to be hiking or camping or fishing or going on hikes and things like that. We just got them fishing poles this week, so they're super excited about that. I took them their first time, and then this weekend there's a church event that's going to be out at a retreat in a beautiful area where there's going to be climbing and fishing and canoes and all that. So there's all kinds of opportunity for the outdoors right here, and we love it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad that you took time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I know you've been busy writing a book, and that's really the reason I wanted to have you on today is to promote the book, but also to tell us a little bit about it. And maybe we can talk about a few other things in the process. But tell us a little bit about the book, what led you to write it, kind of a synopsis of what it's about. I think the title gives it away, but talk a little bit about the book and what led you to do this.
Okay, yeah. So the book is called King of Glory, 52 Reflections on the Gospel of John. I started writing it years ago, actually. It was in 2016. I had a blog, and I thought I really need to start using this blog more. I had a blog that I had nothing on. And so I thought maybe if I had something consistent to write about. And so I started thinking about something that would be good for me personally would be to spend a year in the Gospel of John, studying about Jesus, looking at his life, looking at some of the ways that he's presented. And so it was kind of more for me, I guess, at the beginning to practice writing and to spend a year thinking about meditating on Jesus. And so I started, I would read and then I would write a reflection. It's called 52 Reflections on the Gospel of John. That's the subtitle.
Sure.
And so each of them were, maybe 1,200 to 1,500 words, somewhere in there. And I would post it. And pretty shortly after doing that, I had a number of people, my wife included, and Jeff Jenkins, who said, you really ought to try to see if you can get that published. Put those together, finish the writing, and turn it into a book. And when your wife and Jeff Jenkins tells you to do something, you should listen. And so that is kind of what it turned into. Really, I started writing it in 2016 before we had kids. And then we had Oliver. He was born in August. I was in grad school. I was taking Greek classes. I was doing full-time ministry, and I just had a son. And so we took a break on writing for a while,
A
and it kind
bit.
of sat there for maybe about a year or so. And then I started writing a few more, and then all of those things continued, except I also started teaching classes at a school, and so it slowed down again. And so, it took several years to write because I wasn't writing the whole time. I took a couple of breaks in there. But when COVID hit and I wasn't at the school anymore, and I was spending more time at home in the office, and I was spending more time with the kids, I was able to find more time to go in there and just to do some writing. And so I started it with no kids, and I finished it with a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And but we got it done.
Well, I'm excited to read it. I know it just came out, so I hadn't even got my copy yet, but I'm excited to read it. I assume it's more devotional in nature because it's 52 weeks. Is that right? Kind of a devotional thought per week?
So basically you can read it however you want to. The way it's written is there's 52 reflections, and then at the end there's a number of questions that you're supposed to kind of reflect upon and answer and think about. And I tried to write it with a couple of things in mind. One, you could take 52 weeks if you wanted to and do one per week and kind of meditate on some of the questions there. I tried to do it also with the idea of a group study. If you were wanting to, maybe with a college group or for a Bible class, do some reading it throughout the week, and then you can discuss those questions or read it together and discuss the questions. But I also tried to do it to where if you just wanted to read through it like a book, you could do that. And it's somewhat like a commentary in that it covers almost every paragraph in the Gospel of John. It doesn't necessarily go in order, though. It kind of goes thematically through John.
Okay.
So the first 10 reflections just deal with some of the introductory matters and the major themes and some of the things that you should look for as you read the Gospel of John. Then it moves into the signs that are in the Gospel of John. And so instead of going, from John 1 to John 2, it starts with turning water into wine, and it turns into I think then there's some discussion of the cleansing the temple, but then it goes to healing the nobleman's son, and then the man at the pool of Bethsaida, and it just goes through the signs. And then the next section deals with conversations in the Gospel of John,
Okay.
and that'll deal with Nicodemus, the woman at the well, talking to the blind man, and some of those things. And then it will deal with the passion narrative there at the end, and it'll also discuss Jesus' farewell, that long conversation that he has there in chapters 12 through 18 before he gets arrested.
Wow.
So you can read it as a commentary, you can read it as a private devotional book, but I like to hope that it will be beneficial to anyone who wants to spend more time in the Gospel of John, but then also anyone who wants to spend more time with Jesus himself, getting to know and learn more about him.
Yeah, really interesting. I like how you laid it out. That's really cool. So let me ask you this, Travis. I've done some writing, done some books, none of them to any sort of acclaim, but the process to me is daunting. It's not a fun process to me. The fun part is when it's done. Did you notice in the writing process that this was something that was fun or something that, man, I can't wait to get this done because I'll never do this again?
It's interesting. There are certain sections that I was looking forward to writing and certain sections that I thought just were really interesting. And then there are other sections and other topics where it does seem more like work. You're trying to get this part finished. You're trying to make it readable, applicable. But I guess the same thing is true in teaching for me. There are some topics I love to teach. Some topics, they're important to teach, but I don't love doing it.
Right.
And so I guess I felt the same way with the writing. There were certain parts of it I was really excited about and I enjoyed doing. And then there were parts that I kind of got put off, and then I would have to go through it. It was a really nice feeling, though, when it was no longer in my hands and it was off to the publisher and I got to take a deep breath.
Yeah. Is this something you'll do again?
Yes, I'm actually on reflection number 26 of 52 Reflections. The Gospel of Mark, and
Gotcha.
And so I'm working on that right now, and so that'll be. I'm hoping to finish it this year, but it might go into next year. Kind of depends.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I have another project I'm working on right now.
So is the idea to go through the Gospels and then go from there, or just the whole Bible?
At this point, the idea is to finish Mark. Um, and it's hard when you're doing it not to start thinking about Matthew and Luke. And then if you think about Luke, you kind of have to think about Acts. And so
Sure.
it's kind of expanding a little bit. But I figure I'll burn some of those bridges when I get there. And right now, just try to finish Mark and see what happens from there.
Yeah, I'm waiting on 52 reflections on numbers. That's the one I'm waiting.
Yeah, that'll be a good one right there.
That'll be a good one.
Someone else is going to write that one.
Tell me, Travis, when you're going through the 52 reflections of John, what stood out to you? Maybe something you didn't see before. When you look through that, what hit you the hardest?
Oh, boy. So there are a number of things, and some of them you kind of already knew beforehand, but just really focusing on them and seeing how often these themes get developed, some things really became more impactful. I'll give just a couple quick examples if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one of them, the Gospel of John starts off, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. More so than any other gospel, and probably more so than any other book in the New Testament, John is very explicit about the divinity of Jesus, that Jesus is God, and you see that all the way through. You see all of these witnesses that Jesus runs into who make these declarations about him. And the final thing you see is there after the resurrection, Thomas looks at him and says, "My Lord and my God." Like, you have this idea that Jesus is God, that God became flesh, that Jesus is equal with the Father in John chapter 5. You have that where Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," in John chapter 8 and 58. You have Jesus saying, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." You have Jesus say, "I and the Father are one." You have like all of these statements, and you don't find those statements in the other Gospels, but they're all the way through the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
But then in John 1:18, you have this passage that says, "No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who's in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." And that word is explained right there. The Greek word is literally, we get exegesis from it. But the idea is, no one has seen God, but Jesus has come. And if you want to see who God is, you look to Jesus.
Yeah.
And that idea becomes so powerful to me because it kind of reverses, I think, perhaps the way we tend to do things, which is you think of who God is, and then you think, okay, so Jesus is God. But the way John, I think, is trying to present things is look to Jesus and then realize that God is Jesus. Meaning, start by looking at Jesus and then get your view of God by looking at him. And that's kind of a unique way of doing things because there are some things Jesus does that fit into my paradigm of God really easily.
Right.
Multiplying bread, walking on water, creating the cosmos, all of those things are like, yeah, those are God things. But when Jesus in John 13 gets down on his hands and knees and begins to wash the feet of his disciples, and that is explaining God to me, that's a mind-blowing thought.
It is.
That we have a God who washes the feet of even sinful man. It's uncomfortable to even say it because, we have such awe and respect for God. But Jesus is really redefining things throughout his life and ministry. Yeah. And then you can multiply that even further, that our God is not only the God who washes feet, our God is the God who suffers, bleeds, and dies on a cross. That's a powerful image of the depth of the love, the humility, the service, the goodness, the care, and the kindness that God has even for undeserving man. And that becomes a powerful realization for me. When I go to worship God and I'm worshiping that God, that's meaningful. Wow. And so that was one thing from the Gospel of John that really just impacted me throughout it. Seeing the things Jesus does and recognizing that's what I'm supposed to be learning about God right now. The other thing that I'll mention is seeing how important a good knowledge of the Old Testament is for understanding the Gospel of John.
Sure.
So much of what's revealed about Jesus has a precursor to it in the Old Testament. One of those things that really stood out to me is the connection between Jesus and the temple that you read about in the Old Testament, or the tabernacle before that. So in John chapter 1 and verse 14, it says, The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father. So he had just said that, Jesus is the Word is God, and all of that, but now the Word becomes flesh. And when it uses the word, he dwelt among us, that is not the normal Greek word for dwelling somewhere or staying or remaining somewhere. That's a really unique word. It's only used a couple of times. It is used at the end of the book of Revelation, and it's basically the word tabernacle used as a verb. So it's he tabernacled among us, or he made his tabernacle among us. And it's a direct echo back to the idea of the tabernacle, which the idea of the tabernacle was you're living in this desert now, and God's going to live among you. So you have all your tents. Where is God going to live among you? He lives in the tabernacle. And so it's the dwelling of God on earth. It's the place where God and earth meet together. And what John is saying is that's found in Jesus. And then he goes on to say that we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father. Well, what did you see there in the smoke and in the fire surrounding the tabernacle? The glory of God. Right. So if you wanted to look to God's glory, you look to the tabernacle. Well, Jesus is now where the glory of God and the tabernacle are on earth. And that's going to cause us to read things a little differently. So later on in that same chapter, you have Jesus who sees Nathanael, and he says, I saw you yesterday when you were under the fig tree. And Nathanael is amazed by that. And he says, Rabbi, you're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel. And Jesus says, if you're amazed that I said that, just wait, because you'll see even greater things than this. And then he says this really interesting phrase. You'll see the angels of heaven ascending and descending on the Son of Man.
Right.
And we think, well, what in the world is that about? But if you go back to the Old Testament and you read about the angels of God ascending and descending on something, you'll find in Genesis when Jacob falls asleep on the rock, he has that dream. And you have this ladder where the angels are ascending and descending on this ladder. And Jesus is saying, in essence, I've become that ladder, that connection between heaven and earth, which is kind of like what the tabernacle is. In fact, if you continue to read that Genesis story, Jacob gives a name to that location. And the name he gives it is Bethel. Bethel, which is the Hebrew word for house of God, which is what the tabernacle or the temple is. And so Jesus tabernacles among us. He is that ladder there at the house of God that connects heaven to earth. And then it's the very next chapter when Jesus goes to the temple, starts flipping tables over, and people say, what sign are you showing as your authority for doing these things? And he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. They think he's crazy. They think it took 46 years to build this temple. How are you going to rebuild it in 3 days? And John, the author, lets us know, this little note, he was speaking about the temple of his body.
Yeah.
So if you go back to, he tabernacled among us, we beheld his glory. He is that ladder that connects heaven and earth. His body is the new temple, is the temple that will endure and last. It becomes a beautiful image of the temple as representative of Jesus. And so we don't go to Jerusalem for forgiveness of sins and for sacrifice anymore. You go to the living, breathing, walking, talking Jesus is our new temple. Yeah. And if you keep that idea throughout the rest of John, it really changes the way you read a couple of things. So those are just a couple of examples. I'd love to give more, but if you want me to, I will.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. It always bothers me and frustrates me when I hear Christians say, the Old Testament, we don't need that anymore. That's not us. No, it means everything. Everything that we have in the New Testament is set up in the Old Testament. And one of the things about John that really struck me recently as I was reading is in John chapter 18, when Jesus is in front of Pilate and they have this discourse and Pilate asks the question, what is truth? And I thought about it, and maybe you're probably smarter than I, and you caught this quicker than I did. But I thought that's really a major theme in the Gospel of John. What is truth? And truth is a who, not a what. Truth is Jesus Christ, and that plays out over and over again in the Gospel of John, right? Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life in John 14:6. And you can see another connection. Jesus is called the Logos there in John chapter 1 and verse 1. Yes. But we're also in John 17 that thy word is truth. Right. And so you have the idea of the word is truth, Jesus is truth, and that's all summed up together in him. But one of the fascinating things that John does with the word true, like Jesus doesn't just refer to himself and say, I am the vine. He says, I am the true vine.
Yeah.
You see that the word true is sometimes used to differentiate the way that Jesus is from the way we commonly see things. So you can see vines all over the place, but when you see Jesus, you're seeing the true vine. And the way that I think it's kind of helpful to think about that is Jesus says he's a lot of things. He says he's a
Right.
door, he's a good shepherd, he's the light of the world, which I think has some new creation ideas and themes going
Yes.
back to Genesis. But you have all of these different things. I am the resurrection and the life. But when you look at them, we live in a world, and I think this is one of the major themes in John. We live in a world where you can see the things that are right in front of you. And if you get so caught up in the things that are right in front of you, the physical things you can see with your eyes, you might miss the spiritual truths that are happening all around you.
Sure.
There is in Plato's dialogues, he gives this analogy of the cave where he talks about some people who are basically chained into a cave, and there's a fire behind them, and the only thing they've ever seen their whole lives are these shadows on the wall. And they try to identify those shadows. But since those are the only things they've ever seen, they don't know what reality is. They only know what shadows are. And if you were to take one of those people, unchain them, bring them out of the cave, and put them in the brightness of the middle of the day where the sun is shining and they see trees, they would be so confused and they would have no clue what's going on. But eventually they could get accustomed to it and they could start to see reality. And then if you put them back in there where the shadows are, they'll try to explain reality to the people who are there chained, and they'll look crazy. Right. So that's kind of one of his illustrations about enlightenment, becoming this great philosopher and all of that. I think John does something similar where Jesus will say to Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And Nicodemus thinks about the only type of birth he's aware of, which is, birth from your mother. But Jesus is talking about a deeper, spiritual, figurative, true type of birth. Sure. Not just birth that you see, but a true birth. He talks to the woman in the next chapter at the well, and he offers her living water, from which she will never thirst again. And she says, great, then I won't have to come to this well anymore. Right. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm talking about water that springs up into eternal life within you. He offers food in John chapter 6, but they're thinking about the food that they can eat. And Jesus is saying, don't work for the food that perishes, but for the food that becomes everlasting life. You can go through, and Jesus will then say he's the true bread that comes down out of heaven. Like, you have bread everywhere, but the true bread is the bread that gives everlasting life. So all of that's a way to say, if you look at the idea of truth in the Gospel of John, you have the shadows that people see, and that would be like the physical stuff all around us. But then you have what the reality that's casting those shadows is, what real rebirth is, what real vines are, what real bread is, what real living water is. And you can find this all the way through. And Jesus is saying all of those things, those aren't the shadows. That's right. The truth. That's where reality is, and that's found in him. And he's the one who came down out of heaven. And so he's the one who can be the expert on the things of heaven.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. So let me ask you this, Travis. Okay. Was there a particular passage, verse, chapter that just gave you a lot of angst, one that was just really tough, that kind of humbly troubled you, that was kind of hard to discern?
Yeah, so probably a couple, but honestly, I'll say even the prologue in chapter 1, like the first part of chapter 1, we talked about it already a little bit. That's such a profound and deep introduction to who Jesus is. And I think if you wanted to, you could look at John 1:1 and you could go back to Genesis 1. And you can see they both start with in the beginning, And then it says in John 1:1 that he created all things. And Genesis 1 begins with creation. And then it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So you have light shining in the darkness, which is Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3. And it's like there's this retelling of Genesis through Jesus that takes place there. And you can camp on that. But then you also have the idea of what is the logos, and you can look at how that word is used in Greek ideology and in Greek philosophy. You can look at Stoicism, where the logos is kind of the animating force of the world, and you could go that direction with it. You could look at comparing John 1:1 to Proverbs 8, where there's a lot of similarities there, where Proverbs 8 is talking about wisdom, and even wisdom that was with God at creation. And you can look at that section, you can compare it to the temple. And basically, it was hard for me to figure out what angles I wanted to try to emphasize and what things. I felt like no matter what I tried to do, I couldn't do justice to the depth of the text.
Yeah.
And I'm not talented enough of a writer. But it was a real struggle for me to convey everything I was seeing and hoping to convey in especially that introduction right there. And so that was one angle that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what way I wanted to take that, and I still don't think I'm satisfied with what
And that's at the very beginning. That's what's tough too.
So get through that, and I think you'll like the book a lot more.
Absolutely. I know it's great. Tell us how we can get the book, Travis.
So a number of ways. You can just get it on Amazon. King of Glory, 52 Reflections on the Gospel of John. Travis Bookout is my name. If you type in that information, it should pop up. But it's also available on Walmart.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, most major online retailers. And then if you live near the publisher, which is in Florence, Alabama, you can get it from the publisher, or you can order it online from the publisher at Cypress Publications. And then I think it's also in some local bookstores there in Florence, Alabama. But so those are the ways you can get it now.
Absolutely.
If you send a message to me on Facebook and say you're interested, I bet I can mail one to you also.
Absolutely. And people can send me a message too. You can contact me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. And if you have questions about how to get the book, or if you have a specific question for Travis, we'll make sure that he gets it, and I'm sure he'd be glad to answer it. We love to hear your comments. We always encourage you to share the message about the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Facebook, YouTube. So please share the message. Travis, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Hey, thank you for having me. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
And congratulations on the book. I know it's going to be well received.
Thank you so much. I hope so.
Absolutely. And our love to your kids and your wife. And I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to. And thank you again. I wish the best to you and your family.
Absolutely, Travis. And thank all of you for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.